Hello, internet friends, for what is probably the first time tonight. Welcome back to Keep the Game Moving. I am so excited to be joined this time by Shubham Mehta, who is one of the members of a really cool group that you should be watching, Daisies and Dragons. Shubham, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, I always love to start just by asking people, how did you get your start being a GM?
Right. This is. I'll try to keep the story brief, and because it's a bit winding.
Take us on a journey, my friend.
It is. And funny enough, the story of how I started was a very specific journey, and I remember because it felt like coming of age. Because I didn't start playing D&D till I turned 18, and I know this because I had just gotten my driver's license. So I turned 18. I'd gotten and finally finished my exams. The first two times I'd failed, and it had been an emotional experience because I really needed the drivers. I was living alone in South Africa, and so I needed a car to move around. And the third time I finally went and I got the drivers. And on that day, the day I got my drivers, I went back home, I dropped a friend off, and then in the evening, for the first time, I drove by myself to my friend's house where this D&D game was going to happen. So I know exactly that whole moment of I have my drivers and I'm driving, and then of course the freedom of it all, right? And then the genius I am, I drove by myself in the middle of the night, and I just trusted the GPS to take me in the right direction. And the GPS decided, hey, why don't you go right through the middle of town where there are no street lights? And it feels shady as hell because my friend's on the other side, and so I'm driving, going full panic mode, just hoping I don't hit something, right? But yeah, I remember that I arrived, and it really felt like I'd done the travel part of D&D, where you get to the fireside, it's a long rest, and you're like, okay, I can rest, it's done. And yeah, then we played. We actually started with Pathfinder. My friend introduced me to Pathfinder First Edition. This was 2013, 2014. And I decided to draw. I really played into the stereotypes. This is not a good look, but I was like, hey, I'm going to play a Dwarven Ranger whose parents got killed in an Orcish raid. And I am going to be sulky and moody and not want to talk to people. Because
did you do the Scottish accent? That would have been the final touch if you.
Honestly, the only reason I did it is because my accents suck, and I was like, I will not subject everyone else to that. But I leaned into it hard, and bless my DM, he allowed it and he let me play into it, and he let me have my fun. But then he very quickly made me realize why the tropes I was leaning into were just not going to be fun for anyone else to engage with, because. Here's the problem with a sulky, edgy ranger who doesn't want to talk to anyone in a game about being a party, is that he's not going to have anything to work with. And so we got into a combat classic thing, right? The DM's I'll take it easy. I'll throw some goblins at them. And I hadn't coordinated with anyone in the party or anything or talked to anyone. And the druid cast Entangle. And the druid's also a first-time player. So my friend goes and casts Entangle, and next thing you know, my ranger fails the check. And I'm spending most of this badass ranger who's gonna be, I'm gonna kill some goblins. It's just Entangled for the most of the fight, and then the fight ends, and he's like, I'm gonna try to disappear, so no one knew I was here at all. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. Listening back to myself now, you're like, wow, I was that guy. But I tried to sneak away, and my DM's like, go ahead, roll sneak. Let's see how you do. And I rolled stealth, and I rolled a natural 1. And so the rest of the party got to see a dwarf stuck in the bushes with his ass sticking out. And I was like, you know what? That's fair. I get it. I'm going to try to do better. And then that's kind of where the dice were like, listen, buddy. This is not the game you want to play if you're doing this. So, I learned my lesson, and then I changed from ranger to samurai because Pathfinder has samurais, which was cool. And I still played like a grumpy guy, but I very quickly realized that the fun of playing a grumpy guy is that he has to interact with others, and so lean into that part where he's like, I don't like you, and my druid friend had a tiger, and I was like, but I like your tiger. And so it was a great, and that's where it started. Pathfinder first edition, and I played that for like, I think the campaign went on and off basically like as scheduling allowed for 3 years, and then that's when my master's started, and I was like, I can't possibly be part of a D&D game right now. So I took a step away, and then I didn't play for like 2-3 years till I moved back to India. And I came here and I had a group of friends here, and none of them had ever played any tabletop role playing game. And we were all in our like early 20s at this point. And I was like, and I'd been telling them all these stories about my dwarf's name was Killian. I'd been telling them stories about like all the misadventures Killian got up to and like the one-on-one fights he had and how he was a brawler and he had braces that turned his fist to stone. And they were like, this sounds awesome. We want to play this. So I then obviously took on the DM's role and tried to introduce everyone to Pathfinder. Word of advice, Pathfinder is a great game. But if it's your first time DMing, maybe don't start with Pathfinder.
It is.
That's a steep learning curve you're going to give yourself.
It is definitely a step up in complexity from fifth edition, or
yeah, exactly. So then it kind of steamrolled. I tried Pathfinder first edition, but the party and I we were like, okay, it very quickly devolved into like this is a lot to try tackle, and paused that, then started a new one, and that time I moved to fifth edition, played that for like a year or two. Then again, people had to move, and scheduling meant that campaign fell apart. And then finally, I started a third campaign, and by then I was like a bit jaded because I was like, oh, I don't know if this will last, and I don't want to put in the effort. And I was like, you know what I'll do? I will just build one town. The first town they started, and I'm not building any of the world. Even the map I'm going to give them is just going to be that one small island that they're on, and they can fog of war their way through the rest. But that's the one that landed up running since 2019, and it's still going. So, and it's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I think there's something. So personally, I am what you would call a low prep GM. I like to improv, and I like to sort of go where the players want to go. And so that's actually my preferred thing to do, is just to say, here's a town. How are you going to destroy it? Because they're going to destroy it. So, how are they going to do it? But so are you, as you're doing this home game, even like, what does your prep look like?
It has definitely evolved over time. I think every DM, when they first start out, they kind of tend to over prep because they're worried that, they won't have the right thing ready. And so they have like tables that they can reference. They have a detailed breakdown of like everything that's going on and stuff like that. And you very quickly realize, I think, especially if you tend to reflect on your processes, that most of this falls to the wayside. It's not directly relevant, and it's not even going to play out the way you want it to. So usually you land up just feeling a bit bitter that you didn't get to play with it, right? And so over time, I've definitely a sly flourish, a lazy DM. I've definitely adopted like that approach of like get scenes, have secrets and clues, and then like minimum amount of prep, maximum amount of like just having fun with the scene. I think the only other thing that I kind of, other than that I've really started leaning into is the whole thing from Dungeon World, which is fronts. That's been super useful, and just because now there is a point where initially you're like, okay, you're going to go into your town and you're going to mess around, but I think then as you level up, and the players, especially if they're players who have brought backstories, they want to feel like the world is connected to them, even if it's not about them, it's connected to them. At that point, it really helps to have some larger things at play. And so fronts is a good way to do that without having to write out like detailed plot lines, right?
So you're integrating the fronts from Dungeon World into your home campaign. I think that's a really neat idea. That hadn't occurred to me. And now that you say it, it's like, it's super easy. It's just that's a great idea. How intricate are your fronts? Like, how involved are you getting here?
So for me, the way I'm currently treating them, and I'm fairly new to using them. And the way I'm thinking of them is they should represent the villain and the theme that villain is trying to kind of stand in for, right? And the villain in this case is just mostly a complex character who's gone down a different path than the heroes have. So um, I would say, yeah, my friends aren't very complicated. They are very much just bullet points. I'm a bullet point guy when it comes to like D&D prep. Is 1, 2, 3 subsection A, B, C, and that's kind of how I like it. So yeah, they very much like. For example, one of the things that's happening in my campaign is I kind of decided to set the world in a time where it's a time of troubles from Forgotten Realms, but it's in my homebrew world. So instead of like AO being the one who's like, hey, the gods have been turned mortal, it's a mortal wizard who cast a spell that kind of broke the world and turned them all and like trapped them in these like rebirth cycles, right? The gods. So there is a general countdown to like what happens when these gods don't return to their places of power because there are these vacuums. So there's a front like that, and that has repercussions, and every continent has different things that's going on because of it. But mostly I just have broad strokes, right? It's like, okay, well, this was the place where the goddess of nature kind of had a place. So when she fell, it has transformed like this. And because of this, these are the people, and they have kind of had these interconnected tensions between them. But that's about where I leave it at. Then if the players go and pull on that thread, if they are fascinated by it and they're invested in it, then I'll build it out and be like, okay, here's the logic behind what's going on. It's a lot easier, I think, to build out those details if you have the broad theme down. Whereas if you get into details but don't know what's connecting those details, then it can get very muddly.
Do you involve your players in your world building at all?
Yes, in that they do it unknowingly.
Right.
I go, give me backstories, and if you do, I will use them, and if you don't, that's fine. The world will still exist, but you might find that it doesn't tie into you directly. And I actually have a great example of this. I have one player who's he's very much like he wants to kill stuff and get cool items, and he's just here to have a good time and feel cool doing it, and that's great, right? It's anytime there's a combat thing, this person's really looking forward to doing the maximum sneak damage and just being a badass anime style character, and that's great. But then I have another character player, Indrani, who is one of the co-founders of Desis Dragons. She's like deep into role play, right? She just really enjoys having complex backstories, and also, and at the same time, is someone who likes to likes to min-max, but not in the like annoying, like min-max has a taboo nature to it, but basically wants to be powerful. They don't want to be underpowered, or they don't want to feel weak. They want to feel badass. And so that's a very different experience. And so I would say, yeah, the first player, the rogue DQ, they didn't give me a very like thick backstory. In fact, they generally were like, I don't know. I am an elf who used to build shelves, so I'm an elf on a shelf, and that was it. And that's what I got, and I'm like, okay, I am. There's not a lot going on in the world about elves on shelves.
We're gonna put that back on the shelf.
Yeah, that can stay there. And and then like I sometimes try to throw like threads at him, like, okay, you were part of an assassin order. Here's an old friend. And they're like, I'm not interested in doing a quest with him. I'm on the straight and narrow now. And I was like, okay, clearly someone who's just focused on what's given to them, that tied into the main story. They don't want to do their own character stuff. Let them be. Let them have that fun. That's fine. Indrani's character, on the other hand, built out a whole family that is alive, right? They're like, hey, here are my 3 siblings. Here's my mom and dad. I come from this family. This is why I ran away. They all think I'm dead because of this. This is what I'm trying to do now, right? This is a lot. And I was like, okay, that's great, because I'm going to go make them one of the most important families in the continent that you left. And this just happened. It's great. Now I can talk about this more freely. But literally this Sunday, they finally, after 3 years of running this game, they came back to that continent that they had run away from. And they revealed themselves to their parents and saying, okay, I wasn't actually dead. And it's this massive reunion, because it's like, and for them, the parents, of course, it's like shock and like, what? We thought you were dead. But for her, it's the realization that even though for Indrani's character, Maeve, it made sense to do this, that running away and faking her death made sense, as it would for any adventurer who's going to go adventure. She essentially kind of broke her family, because her family is like, we lost our daughter.
Yeah.
That's not okay.
Which, especially if she's like the only child, that could be a
funnily enough, she's one of 4 children, but so the other player landed up being her brother, and he also left.
Oh no!
So you had 50% of the family go bye, and then they both come back together at the same time,
right?
To find that they've gone from being like Marquis and Marquettes of the kingdom, to being like farmers on a villa, because they've just lost all their wealth and they're in debt and everything. And it's great because the world, in this case, I didn't build this; they built it unknowingly, because they were like, hey, we have this family. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to play around with that. That's great. To answer the simple question of, do I involve my players? Yes, but unknowingly. That's the simple answer.
I think that, so I think that's great, and I think it's awesome when you can have like 2 people who will play siblings or something like that, because that's just automatically a relationship that everybody knows and can kind of fend off of each other and that sort of thing. So I am fascinated by you just sort of blithely were like, oh, I was in South Africa and there was a D&D game. Like, where does that come from? How easy is it to find a D&D game in India?
In India, very tough. South Africa, very easy.
Wow.
2 very different experiences. South Africa is a fairly, I would say it's more Western. It's like it's in that middle space. And when it comes to the African continent, it's in that middle space where it's got a very strong Western influence. And also because it was so late, it only kind of became an independent republic in 1993, 1994. So, it had like a very strong colonial presence for a very long time. So that kind of cultural import is very strong. India, and because of that, there's game shops and all of that. So it's easy to find a D&D game, right? Like you can totally go into a place and it's a comic book store. There'll be games running. There'll be someone running Magic the Gathering. There'll be someone running Warhammer, and you can do that. India, very different. India is it's like the population of South Africa fits into my city,
right?
And that's not even an exaggeration. It's literally a numerical fact, and it depresses me every time because it's just such a scaling, like, whoa, what happened? But to get to the point, in India, it's tough. It's our community on Discord. It's literally the biggest server of D&D players in India, and it's at 730 members, right? And that's tiny. You're like, that can't be the most, but that's how it is, because in India, there's multiple kinds of barriers, right? So, and this is a recurring topic in our community, but basically, think of it. To get into tabletop role-playing games, most of them, almost, I would say, let's take a random statistical number, like 99% of them would be written in English or some European language, right? Which means that in India, while literacy rates are there and most people in cities speak English and read English and all of that, and so I'm not gonna. There's often an idea that in India you don't speak English, but actually it's widely spoken and it's on all government documents, right? It's in English, so it's not that we do, but there's a difference between being able to read and speak English and playing a game that is written entirely in English, right? So one of them is obviously language barriers. Then the second is cultural barriers, because most tabletop role-playing games are heavily inspired from European mythologies, or even just European tropes around sci-fi and fantasy, right? And if you go watch Lord of the Rings, and if you go read Harry Potter or any of these kind of popular media, you'll very quickly fall in line with what's going on. But that's still like another step before you can pick up the monster manual and be like, okay, I know what goblins are. I get it.
Right.
Because
or even worse, it's couched in poorly cribbed cultural, it's appropriating a culture, D&D has done more than its share of that.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's that side of it as well. So then, okay, so you have a language barrier, you have cultural context barriers. Then you have the most prominent, which is a cost barrier. Technically, it doesn't cost anything to start playing D&D, You can roll digital dice. You can use makeshift character sheets. The SRD does give you just enough to play one game if you really want to. So you could do that. And there are so many other games that don't even require like you to buy anything. But it's still like you got to know about them and access them, right? And then you do, and then you got to start playing, and you got to. So there's that general cost of like most people, if you're like, hey, what do I need to play D&D? They're like, get the 3 core books and then just run a game. And that's an easy thing to say, and I think it's a very tough thing to actually do in general. And it's particularly difficult, I think, in countries like India. And I'll specifically only speak about India because I don't think this is true for all South Asian or Asian communities. But in India, I think what happens is, even though there is a strong middle class, though fledgling right now, we have some economic problems going on. But even though we do have a middle class, that middle class's leisure time is severely restricted, right? Because most people are going to work 6 days a week. They're going to work 9 to 5, and they're going to be exhausted by the end of it. So when are they going to play a game? On Sunday?
Yeah.
And there's usually strong families, so you're going to spend time with families. So like, how tough scheduling is, right? And imagine you have this going on, and then someone's like, hey, so that one Sunday that you get to rest, come over for a 5-hour game where we sit around a table and tell stories to each other. And it may not be fun for you because you don't know what this game involves. You might love it, but it's a big thing to ask, right? So, and then especially because leisures and hobbies are ideally picked up between your teen years and your early 20s. You can, of course, pick them up later on, but that's like a sweet spot where you aren't tied into a lot of kind of adult responsibilities.
Yeah, there's sort of the joke of like, you get the hobby when you can't afford it, and then when you can afford it, you don't have the time to do the hobby. Like
exactly,
sort of
right?
The bell curve there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem, is that in India, most kids from grade 8 onwards are studying their asses off, right? They're going to school, then they're doing the extracurricular activities, like whatever, sports or like a thing if they want to do that. And then they're going to tuitions where they're studying for like the exams that are going to come up, because it's really important that they nail these exams so they can get into good colleges. And you have to understand the cutoff for these colleges is, it makes Harvard look nice, because the advertised like cutoff will be like 98% on your exams, right? And also the colleges don't deliver, but they're now studying for that. So there is no time in that where they're like, I'm going to go play for D&D for 5 hours. Or I'm going to go play Masks for 5 hours. They would love it, but they're not going to do it because, I mean, where are they going to get the bandwidth for it, right? So there's just all of these different layers that are stopping. And so it's very, I would say in India, it's very tough. And then there's also the problem, there's no board games and no comic book shops. There are a few that have started popping up. There's board games, there's a few basically, but they're only in major cities, and they're literally like 2 or 3 per city.
Right.
Which is not enough in any way to.
And there's no conventions or anything like that. So.
Conventions. We have Comic-Con, which is basically a glorified merch convention where you just get like shirts and shit. It's not really like, and like honestly, the weirdest thing I see is this again speaks to like what happens with most teens is. Most teens are watching TV as a way of like as a break in. Right. They're not going to go, or they're playing like maybe a mobile game because that's what they can afford. So if you look at the merch that's sold, it's Harry Potter, Friends, and like PUBG. And it's because these are like the most accessible, mainstream, massively popular platforms. D&D is big, but it's like in the world, but it's not that big. And like again, there's so many buy-ins, right? There's so many things you need to do before you're like, oh, I get it, I get the appeal.
It's fascinating because like from a Western, probably myopic viewpoint, I think of the history and the culture of India as already being kind of fantastic. There's already such a strong fantasy element in, and that carries right on through to Bollywood and to your cinema and that sort of thing. but to your point, like that's one more thing that people would rather spend their time, or their really precious luxury time, I'll plop down and watch a movie or something,
definitely, like especially in the lower middle class, and that it's because there's joint families living together. They'll be like, hey, it's Eid or it's Diwali or it's Holi, it's a festival, I have a day off or I have a weekend off, let's go. And like I'm maybe getting, like if it's Diwali or Eid, you're getting a bonus like from your job, so let's go splurge a bit, let's go all watch a movie, right? That's a thing everyone in the family can do. And that's why a lot of Bollywood for a long time was, every film was everything, right? It was an action film, it was a romantic film, it was a musical, it had drama, because it needed to cater to the whole family. And so it worked like that. Now it's obviously with platforms, people start, they can personalize. So it's evolving in that sense. But yeah, it's literally that. It's everyone's like, I'd rather just go watch a movie. To kind of go back to the point of fantasy, that's the other thing, is that, so I do see where you're coming from, because I also want to play around with Indian mythology. But I'm an atheist, and even though I come from, like, my family is Hindu, and like my family's upper caste, which again comes with its own set of privileges, right? And that's a whole thing. I can maybe get away with it because my privilege protects me a little bit. But at the end of the day, this is a religion that is actively practiced by a large part of this population. So you can't really go and make like a satirical or a comedic take or adapt it into like a, fun, pokey D&D game, because there is that aspect of like, okay, but there are some people who will genuinely feel hurt by this. Now, I'm of the opinion, and is that I think faith is its own thing, and religion should be open to criticism. It's similar to like why the West has so many pieces of media that talk about Christianity in fiction, right? Like Satan is a character, Lucifer is a character. Constantine is such a great kind of series, and especially I really enjoyed the Keanu Reeves film, even though it's not true to the comics. It's really well done, and I think it's a great way to unpack a lot of these themes that are inherent in these religious texts. But to do that, you need to have people who are okay with feeling a sense of like, hey, he's not attacking my faith, he's criticizing some of the problematic ideologies in the religion. And that's a very touchy ground right now.
Well, especially. And it's a different conversation, home game versus public game or stream game or something as well. But it is about everybody being at the table, being comfortable with it. It's a really interesting point you just brought up, because it's very rare for I can't think of a D&D game that was like let's nail Jesus. We're gonna like make fun of Jesus, or even we're gonna have Christian theology be a part of the game. But I bet there are 50 dozen games that are like including these totally appropriated images of like the multi-armed Kali and all this and that sort of thing, that for and that kind of dichotomy of like, well, we wouldn't do that with this, but it's fine to do it with this.
There's this idea that because it's a pantheon, it's totally okay to mess around with it. And look, I'm also one who like we all totally at least me, I and amongst my friends, I have a respectful fascination with the mythology. I think there's a lot of really great ideas and philosophies there, and some very problematic ones as well. And so I like making the occasional joke about it. Like Shiva for me is such a cool god, and gods are rarely cool. It's like you don't really go like, Jesus, such a cool bloke, right? That guy. I mean, great person, but again, that's not how you would talk about Jesus. But
there's actually a joke in America about we call it's like the youth preacher meme, where there's like a guy who's trying to tell kids how cool JC was.
Yeah, exactly, right. But if you look at like Shiva, he is he's the god of dance. He literally sits on atop the Himalayas at like he's known as the Natraj, and he's supposed to do this dance that like marks the end of times, right? And like when he dances, the earth shakes, and he has a snake wrapped around his neck because it represents the poison he holds in his throat that he swallowed, because if it fell to the earth, it would destroy all life. But if he swallows it, he also dies. So he just holds it in his throat, right? And he sits atop a tiger skin, and he drinks bhang, which is opium, basically. So you have a god who does opium, and you're telling me, yeah, like, and like you're like, wait, you're telling me I need to be respectful of? He's the coolest guy. He's a rock star.
Yeah.
Like, he dances and he does opium. What do you want me to do with this? But at the same time, of course, there are others who are like, don't joke about it.
Right.
Don't, and that's where it gets tricky.
Well, and it's sort of, every game is going to have some cultural areas that they either don't want to touch, or it's I don't know, I'd be interested actually. So I'm a big fan of safety tools at the table, right? So like if I have somebody at my table who's religious and we start bagging on Jesus, they can be like, I'm gonna X card that, I'm uncomfortable with this, that sort of thing. Have you found that safety tools are making headway in your
especially in our community? It's like, so if you're going to make a post announcing like looking for players, an LFG post, you have to mention the safety tools you'll be using.
Nice.
So it's just our community from the get-go has been fortunate in that it's Indrani, and then so Chirag's the third person who helped fund Desis Dragons, but Indrani and like the other moderators have just been incredible with like being very proactive in creating a healthy space and good boundaries, right? Mm-hmm. So the server safety tools, like you even share the Monte Cook PDF on there as part of the template. So it's like, even if you don't know what it is, it's there in the templates that you can use and then link. And the players know that, like DMs should be pointing out safety tools or whatever. So lines and veils, X cards, those are like your general, most commonly used ones. And that's or like a checklist, right? And so definitely use those where and real world religion is definitely something I don't put in my games because it's tricky, like you said, right? You don't know how it might land up just becoming a bashing session on someone's faith. So I don't put in real world religions. I create fictional gods, but for example, one of the things that happened, I'm running a game on the server just as a friendly game, which is set in Taldore, the critical role setting, right? And I was playing an NPC, and the NPC cursed. And because of the South African raised person I am, I landed up cursing, Jesus Christ. And like, and everyone is like, who's that? Who's that in Taldore? And I'm like, oh God, what did I do? Why am I gonna? And so I obviously, it's friends, and and it's like all understood. And I'm like, he's my dad. I always curse my dad's name, and like, and that just became a random side joke, but and that's fine, right? Like no one's gonna get like all worked up about it. But I'm not gonna go ahead and introduce Shiva in there unless I'm going to really be putting in the work of representing him well. And making sure that the players are okay with me exploring what these things, what faith and religion mean. In fact, just to quickly, one of my players, Ari, they actually playing a cleric, and they are dealing with this. They brought a really interesting idea to the table. So in Taldore, there are 2 moons, and there's also a god of the moons called the Moon Weaver. And so they were like, what if I was raised to worship the Moon Weaver, but along the way I learned, I was raised to worship the 2 separate moons. And along the way, I was approached by the Moon Weaver, who was like, I'm the true god of both moons, and your faith, the people who are telling you that I'm separate from the 2 moons, is different, right? And so they're dealing with this thing where they worship essentially the same thing, but how it is represented and the philosophy around it are 2 diametrically opposed things. And basically the player and the character are both just exploring their own faith and what it means to have, to believe in something as opposed to having religion and all that. and they check in, right? They're like, hey, is this becoming too religious? And I'm like, no, I think especially because you're doing it in a fantasy setting, it's a great place to explore it. And it's not like you're going and saying, hey, the rest of you, you're not allowed
Right.
to have a god, right? It's
Right.
just you internally exploring it. And there was a great little way that it landed up playing out, because I put a trap door in front of them and they were stuck in a fallen temple of Erathis, goddess of justice. And there were scales that were in front of them. And they had the trapdoor. The trick was basically that you need to balance the scales without having your eyes open, because justice is supposed to be blind.
Ah, there we go.
Very simple thing, but they couldn't figure out, and but they're trying to balance it, right? And this player comes up and they're like, I'm going to put one symbol from the representing the two moons in one side of the scales, and I'm going to put one symbol of the moon weaver in the other. And I'm like, that's just a brilliant solution, because I'm never going to be the one who's like, no, your faith is imbalanced. If you think that's what it is, that's what it is. And that's a great way to unpack, that separation of religion and faith. And like, kudos to you. That was amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
that's an interesting, like, as a side note, puzzles and like traps in games can be a real challenge, for a GM, because, like, to your point, if he doesn't get the answer, I actually have taken now to, when I make a puzzle, the answer is whatever the players come up with. Like with it, I'm like, yep, that it sure was that pitchfork. That's right. Yeah.
Totally it. No, very much so. I've had two experiences. I've had experiences where I come up with a lot of riddles and puzzles, and then I have that one really smart player who just guesses the right answer instantly, and it's like, this was a cakewalk. It helps that they play a high intelligence wizard, but they don't even roll. They just genuinely know the answer.
Right.
I'm like, great, solved my riddle. This was supposed to be challenging. Never mind.
That's the other challenge is this a puzzle for the players or for the characters? I did one of my early shows was with my buddy Bill Lee, and he did at a con. He ran a Cthulhu game where we were all the Indiana Jones characters,
right.
And he did he did puzzles, but all of the puzzles were skill based. So like, I'd roll my archaeology and he'd be like, well, India using your keen sense of archaeology, to point the arrow to the west, to do this and that sort of thing. And so there was it was kind of like in 5e terms, it was an extended skill check where, like, we needed 6 successes, but it was more narrative because of the way he did it. And I've stolen that idea several times. I really like it.
Sounds like a great idea. Yeah, I think definitely. You're right. Like, player, is it a challenge for the players, or is it a challenge for the characters? And yeah, often it just lands up being a challenge for the players, unless you're doing, like you said, maybe a trap, which is a skill challenge, and then maybe the rogue gets to shine, right? But if it's like a logic puzzle, it's are you going to roll an intelligence throw and then just get the answer? That's not really fun. So yeah, definitely. I think it's also, I don't think D&D is exactly suited for puzzles as such, unless you're doing, like you said, like the narrative-based skill checks. So generally I avoid them unless thematically it just feels like something that anyone can be trying to solve, right? Like players can
I love how you were like, oh, you tied the solution. I mean, in a moment of improv, it wasn't like any of that was planned, but you tied the solution into both that character's story, and it was a perfect solution for that character to come up with. That's that's when, as a GM, you're just like, nice.
Yeah. I was like, take a point of inspiration. That was amazing. The door swings open. Let's move on. I'm not begrudging that. It's amazing. It's gonna go down in history as like a cool thing that happened in your story.
Yeah. So you have your Discord server with a huge I'm gonna, despite your poo-pooing of it, I'm gonna say with an impressive community, so is that how you're finding games? Is that how people are mainly, and I mean, it sounds like from what you were saying that because it's Discord and everything like that, most of these games are happening online.
I would say,
and with lockdown and
definitely lockdown is one thing. Everyone being so spread out, because most players are going to be. I haven't done a survey. We've done surveys, but we haven't done surveys about like where exactly they're from, because that would be a bit too much information. But generally, they would be from like major cities, right? But major cities are still massive, and so to meet up and like, let's find a place, because now you got to find a place that you're going to sit around and play a game. And not everyone will have that space at home. Maybe they have family, or generally just don't have that freedom of like, hey, give me 5 hours to sit at a table with my friend, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say most games happen online. Most people just use voice; they don't even use video.
That's
And
fascinating to me.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
I can't imagine playing just like it's like a radio play, because so much. Even we talked earlier about how playing online is tough because you don't get intonation and all that stuff, and
yeah.
you don't have the energy. But without picture, you don't even have like facial expressions and
Yeah, I personally can't see myself doing it because I've been spoiled by in-person games, and
right.
then I'm comfortable being on camera. So I'm like, I'm gonna run games where at least I'll have my camera on, and then whoever else can have it on, great. But yeah, a lot of the community uses voice, and I'm genuinely impressed that they managed to pull it off. But
Yeah,
a lot
that's
of it is
fascinating.
like, yeah, they have patience, and like, I think they learn to just be respectful and like pace themselves differently, right?
And I bet it's great for teaching, because a lot of
Yeah,
players could learn this, and a lot of GMs could
yeah,
learn. It's great for teaching listening.
yeah,
Really listening to the other players. You have to do it
definitely.
if voice is on.
Yeah, definitely. I think it requires a fair, and that's partially again why I'm not good at doing it, because I'm very like, one of the reasons why I prefer being a DM over being a player is because I my brain just goes phases out very quickly
Mm,
unless it's being engaged constantly. And so as a GM, I'm like on my toes, right?
yeah,
But as a player, I'm listening, but if it's just like a little bit of chit chat, or if it's not even directly tied and it's just two play characters role playing, I'm respectful of what they're doing, but I'm not gonna. I'll phase out, and it's a
yeah.
bad thing. But like, yeah, these people on the community. I'll say this: I poo-poo the size of the community, but the community itself is incredible. The people
Mm,
are just amazing. I'm really proud of like who they are and just how much respect and like help they bring to the table. And yeah, they managed to run voice games, and they're all we have. I think I would say almost every day there's at least one game running on the server, which is a fair number because that's still 7 games with 7 different groups, which is like
and
I don't.
now you have people on this Discord from the entire sort of Indian diaspora. So like,
Yeah.
like, because here in the Bay Area, we have a very large
Mm.
Daisy community, and it's
Mm.
specifically Indian, but also, we have a pretty large Pakistani and that sort of
Mm.
thing.
Mm.
And so you have folks from it's kind of bringing people from all over together.
Yeah, definitely. It's I would say it's largely people who grew up in India and are either still here or have just recently moved away. But
Mm,
there's also a fair number of people who are like basically part of the diaspora. I mean, technically, I'm part of that group because I grew up more outside than I did over here. Chirag also, he grew up in, I believe it was, shit, I don't want to get this wrong. I know he grew up in Nigeria and then London. God, I hope I got it's Nigeria and not somewhere else.
you'll
He's
hear
gonna
about
kill
it if
me.
you didn't.
Yeah, I'll definitely hear about it. He's like, I said West Africa. uh, anyway, so yeah, but yeah, it is bringing a lot of people from across the continent, not the continent, the world, together. Yeah,
Which I
definitely.
think is the super cool thing. Now on your in your stream, Daisies and Dragons, you actually, thankfully for me, because I'll cards on the table. I'm not a big D&D fan. But you also play. I've been enjoying. You've been playing more experimental games, including games that you've designed. Is that?
Yeah,
And
yeah. Yeah, definitely. So I basically what happened was we were doing with a bunch of other really awesome GMs. We were doing a charity stream for Ukraine. So it was called Help Action Ukraine. It was a 24-hour stream, and we were just raising funds for Ukraine. And so it was GMs from across the world. And I obviously I was like, okay, I'll run a game. And here's the thing: if you're going to run a one shot, I think D&D is probably one of the worst systems for a quick one shot because it gives you very like, yeah, you can have fun, but a lot of D&D is designed for long campaigns where your character gets to evolve over time. So one shot doesn't really give you that thrill of a neatly packaged holistic experience. And if you're a stream, you have even less time. You have 2 hours,
right.
which means it's going to be very packed. You're not really going to get to know the characters. You may or may not follow the plot, and it won't go through the ebbs and flows that a story should. So I was like, I'm not going to run D&D. And Masks is already being run. What's something I can just pick up and just go crazy with? And I was like, Grant Howitt has a bunch of amazing one-page RPGs. I'll have a look at those. And I found Sexy Battle Wizards. And I was like, that's bloody genius. I love this. My players are going to trip on this stuff. So yeah, we ran that. And that was kind of my hook. I was like, oh, I like the idea of one-page RPGs. So yeah, we are definitely diversifying away from just D&D. I designed Nyan Noir, a Meowstri. It's still a work in progress. It has a lot of work pending.
Oh,
a Meowstri. And it's a honey heist meets sexy battle wizards, and you're basically a cat detective trying to solve a mystery. And I'm working on a lot of the mechanics, and it's my first time really designing my own game. But on the server, that's a whole different thing, right? There's a bunch of people who have. There's one of my players, Ari. They're the same person who did the cleric thing. They've designed a whole game system called Black Sun, which is a PBTA based thing. And in their world, basically the undead came back, but they weren't like zombie hosts that you had to kill. It was something that people came to terms with. And it was like, oh, this is a way to process grief. And so there's a whole world around hey, the undead are here. And as long as they aren't violent, we will come to terms with it. And there are classes and everything around it. Great thing, right? Amazing. And there's a bunch of other people who are creating their own monster stat blocks or creating their singular RPGs. I'm trying to do more slowly and steadily. But I'm more of a world builder and campaign setting guy than I'm a game system designer, I guess. At least from what I can tell. Maybe that'll change later.
Now,
but yeah.
When you're running these games, are you running all homebrew? Are you so personally, I prefer to take a published material and then make it almost unrecognizable. Everybody jokes that when they're like, oh yeah, you can watch it, you're not going to get any spoilers for Massive Nyarlathotep from watching Ezra's run because it's going to be totally different. And so that for me, and among many reasons, but one of my big ones is everything I make has a third act problem. I never know how to end things. And so using a published material, I'm like, okay, here's an end. The middle, I can just make up.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Third acts are tough. I have also experienced the same issue when it comes to, especially with tabletops, right? Third acts, when you can control player actions. Which I mean, when you're writing a story.
Yeah.
So, by the way, my day job is a screenwriter. So,
there you go. Okay.
Yeah. So, third acts I get because I'm like, okay, a story can only have a good third act if they have gone through the characters delivered on their journey, right? They need to have gone through the ebbs and flows, and then, but if players are doing stuff, third acts are notoriously difficult because they might get to the scene where the third act needs to happen, but they might not have experienced enough difficulties to kind of earn that catharsis. And that is definitely tricky. It's something I'm working on, but I would say published adventures definitely have that benefit. I've run a few short adventures that are published, and I've tried running Curse of Strahd. My issue is that when I start having to prep games that are pre-written, it means I have to read a lot and then keep it in my mind. And I stress about is this detail important? Do I mess it up? And generally, I know the advice is that, listen, all adventures, you can muddle the details. It's fine. It's just there to kind of give you a guideline, right? But it makes me nervous. So I generally homebrew everything.
That's the trick is, truisms like that are only true if they're true for you. If everybody can say till they're blue in the face, well, just, whatever you say is what happened and that sort of thing. But, there are definitely people who are like, wait, I forgot to say the one important thing. Oh no, and that becomes a hang up. It becomes a whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is the stupidest question you're ever going to be asked, but it just for some reason popped into my head. So when I'm running a game as a GM, I'll sometimes use accents as a shorthand to build character. If I use an upper crust English accent, people know, okay, this is a snooty guy, that sort of, or, that sort of thing. And I'm wondering if there's like if there's an Indian equivalent of that. Like, are there kind of cultural shorthands that you use to convey information about a character?
Okay, so that's a great question. There is definitely something you can do. There are a lot of different accents that represent certain communities and tropes and backgrounds, and I actively avoid most of them because I feel like it gets into very messy background, right? Is that thing of like, if you're going to do like a quote unquote redneck accent, you are definitely leaning into the idea of like, oh, this person didn't get a good education or whatever,
right.
and it's problematic, right? Unless you maybe do like a subversion of it and then you like surprise
and that's
the
the
player.
trick. Yeah, that's the trick is
right. I'm generally not very good with accents, and so I don't use them as often. I use more posturing. So for me, it's like I'm gonna get like a little bit. My nose is really gonna tilt up if I'm gonna play an upper crust guy, right? Or like
physicality.
Yeah, physicality of it all, and maybe like a little more tonality. Like, if I'm a noble, I will talk with a slow, posh accent, and it's not really an accent. It's just that my voice is very controlled. And but hey, guys, I'm looking for a deal. Give me a deal. It's more about the cadence of it all, and I think that's
a great way to put it. And that physicality note is super important. That is a great tool in a GM's toolbox. And I think one of the most effective ways, not so great on stream, but when you're playing at the table, is standing up. You know, when you that can change the whole makeup of a scene. It can give a character you can loom over the table sort of metaphorically and really.
Definitely physicality in that sense is super valuable in conveying a lot, right? Like, just hunching up and then instead just spreading your arms wide can make a big difference. And that's largely why like in-person games are so much more effective.
All right, we're back. So we close every episode with the same questions. So what is your favorite system to run?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Okay, so I've experienced a handful of systems. I'm aware of the general community sentiment around D&D, but I do enjoy it because of the way I run it. And in that, I kind of lean more into the narrative and less into the simulation. Fewer roles, more, and like I'm okay with where I'm with it. That said, there are a few systems I've tried recently that have really caught my eye. I'm generally a big fan of most things that come out of PBTA systems. Masks just feels like so much fun to be a superhero and kind of run that kind of wild. Yeah, really like that. But the one that I tried recently that I was a big fan of is Wander Home, which is by Possum Creek Games. It definitely, so it's a pastoral game where you are basically, you will create a character. It's no dice, no GM. The system's no dice, no GM. And basically, it's you're living in a world where the wars ended. It's and people are rebuilding. And it's pastoral, so everyone's like an animal of some sort. You're playing you literally one of your, like, every class you will be playbook. Every playbook you'll be choosing, an animal that you're playing, and then everyone's just improvising with the use of like prompts, right? Like two things you are and two things you're not. Those kind of prompts, and then using that to role play their way ahead. And the reason I really enjoy this is because I'm a nerd for world building, and as soon as I get into this game, and there are others who are bouncing off me, we'll end up creating a bunch of really crazy stuff, and I really enjoy that. And like, I know one of the first times I played it, my friend and I, we saw one of the prompts was, you see a place that is a temple to the 15 small gods. And it's just supposed to be like a prompt that you're like, okay, cool, that's a temple to the 15 small gods. But being who we are, we were like, who are they?
Right.
And then you come up with them, right? So there is no GM who's going to be like, these are the 15 gods. So we came up with 15 gods on the go and gave them their own like reason for existing, and what do they look like and what do they do. And it was just, that was so much fun. So yeah, big fan of Wander Home.
Have you played The Quiet Year?
I haven't played the Quiet Year
Because if
yet.
you're a nerd
Yeah.
for world building, like
Yeah.
the Quiet Year is almost like, let's make a world that will then RPG and the RPG.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like there's nothing. I haven't played a lot else out there like it, but
Yeah.
it's really cool for that.
Yeah, definitely want to check that out. In fact, Chirag, he played a lot of games, and so usually when we want to try something else, and we're like, okay, we've been playing D&D for a while on stream, let's switch it up. We usually be like, Chirag, what do you have in your vault of just insane tabletop role-playing games? And he'll pull out something, right? And he'll be like, do you guys want to do World of Darkness? Do you want to do Fiasco? Do you want to do, I don't know, something else? And we'll be like, yeah, sure, any one of these. Blades in the Dark, great system, right?
Man, Fiasco. Like, I'm just trying to imagine like making some sort of I don't know, more culturally focused Fiasco play sets could be fascinating. Like around an Indian wedding or something could just be a fascinating Fiasco play
Definitely. Yeah, I think that's, in fact, this actually leads into a great point that I often want to make whenever I'm talking about like Indian adaptations, or is that often when the West looks to the East for like, hey, and with good intent, right? They're like, hey, we
Right.
want cultural diversity, we want to represent, we want to be inclusive. Often the things that are most likely to be pulled on is like mythology and Bollywood films, right? And that's great. These are very prominent aspects, and sure, I get why you would want to pull on them because a lot of people will know what you're talking about. The problem with them in general is that they come from like, they represent a hegemonic view of society. They usually are practiced by a certain part of society, a dominant or not dominant majority part, but not the whole, right? And so when someone's like, hey, can you come in and write something that's Indian inspired, I specifically am like, yeah, sure, I can do the mythology part, sure, but I also want to bring in something that's culturally, like just about the experience of living and growing up here. That isn't necessarily informed by mythology. It might be informed by experiences around it, but and like weddings are a great example. That was a great example when you said Fiasco and weddings, because yeah, Indian weddings are. My mom's like, when you get married, we're gonna have a 7-day wedding, and I'm like, hell no. I know, but you can dream. Yeah, no. And so 7-day wedding, you're kidding me? That's an
It's
adventure.
already a fiasco.
Yeah, right. You're like, it's just gonna be so many different things that can go wrong. So yeah, in that way, right? That's the kind of stuff I want to see more of. Is if you're gonna bring in, and I think this is like stories like the films like Turning Red and Encanto are so great because they weren't like, hey, let's just go ahead and take a little bit of the mythology, and but it was like, hey, what does it mean on a cultural side, right?
Yeah.
When you move them to Canada, or you move them and like they have the magic and whatever, but what does it mean to be in this family?
Well, and they're so like, especially Turning Red, but also in Kanto, are so grounded in a time and a place that kind of, that bring that I don't know, reality is the wrong word, but that sense of you just get such a strong sense of the people in that time and place, and it grounds the fantastical elements in a in a milieu, for lack of a less.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I like it's yeah, definite for me, like it's crazy that Encanto, which is a film about a Latin American family, kind of spoke so strongly to me, and it's because the ties are on the level of, hey, big joint families, matriarchs, and post-colonial trauma, right? Like those are like the underlining themes. And I'm like, yeah, that speaks no matter which part of the world you're, because the British Empire, the sun didn't set on it, which means a large part of the world knows exactly what that felt like. So yeah, no, definitely, I think that kind of grounding is a great way to do representation and diversity, and also then actually bring new themes, because that's where they often come from. Yeah.
Another key factor, and I hear this a lot from Black content creators, is not focusing on the trauma side of things. Showing, if you're showing these cultures and these characters in times of joy, and in having positive representations, because
definitely.
the sort of the shorthand, the easy way is to be like, and this guy was an ex-slave, and so he's super angry, and and it's just it's surface and it's easy, and it's making this person one-dimensional.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think this is true for not almost every minority or just smaller communities. Is just yeah, it's great to kind of have some of the trauma explored and use storytelling as a way to come to terms with it. But that's not all you are. You aren't just your trauma. You don't tell a depressed person, hey, your depression defines you. You tell them the exact opposite. So why would you want stories to do that, right? So I would say, yeah, definitely. And I think in particular, great way to do it is to focus on not even the joy, because that kind of that's one side, but the hope, right? Even if you're going to tell a story about trauma, bring hope into it, because that's what we need. Is not just we as a minority, but like people in the world need hope, and I find stories are a great way to bring hope. So if you're going to explore some trauma, then help me work through it. Don't just fetishize it. Be like, oh, look at this slavery, or look at this kind of like diaspora where he's like just has a horrible family that doesn't understand it. Like, yeah, that's true. In fact, a great film that does this is Bend It Like Beckham, which I don't know if you've ever seen.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great movie.
And Bend It Like Beckham's like, years family trauma from like being a young Indian girl who wants to play soccer in London, and it's like there's going to be family baggage, and there's going to be like wedding pressure and all of these things, but we're going to bring hope into it. We're going to be like, she's going to overcome these barriers, and we're going to have great ally characters, and we're going to have a lot of fun while we do it, right? It's not going to be like really depressing music playing throughout as her life falls apart and whatever. It leaves you with like, yeah, that's what I've if you're going to do that, if you're going to explore trauma, explore it with a bit of hope.
I think another example of that just sort of leapt to mind as you were saying that is the current Miss Marvel, the comics run of Miss Marvel. In having the family, and not wanting her family to know that she's a superhero and all this stuff, and having the traditional problems there, but being a superhero, and and there's so many things, and being that lived experience of New Jersey and the weird cultural melting pot that is New Jersey is a great example of that. So what is a system that you would love to run?
What is a system I would love to run? Geez. Okay, so I'm clearly sounding like a fanboy at this point, but Possum Creek Games also has a new system coming out called Yaziva's Bed and Breakfast, and
you guys played that, right? I think you had a
We played one of the chapters from it. It's only coming out next year, the whole book, and it's a very fascinating game because every chapter is a story. There is something that's happening already in the bed and breakfast, and you then just take up the characters and explore that scene that's been set up for you, right? So we, for example, took it's the same day every day, by the way. In this bed and breakfast, it's the same day every day.
So it's a horror story, is what we're getting.
There's definitely themes of like horror that you can totally explore, and there's a lot of great themes that you can explore. And but one of the characters, it's their birthday, but that means it's their birthday every day,
right?
And so we take it up, but the first time you play it, right, of course, everyone's like, okay, it's your birthday. We're going to plan a birthday surprise for you. And so there's a whole chapter around it. And the reason I'm really excited for it is because I like telling stories that are in prose or script format, and I like tabletop role-playing games, and this is both of them at the same time. I get a scene, or I write a scene, and then my players have to pick up the characters that I give them, and then they go around and do stuff. And it's great that they go around and do their own thing, but the fact that like that extra bit of like tool set is super fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to playing that. I'm also looking forward to playing Arc. It's already out. I haven't run a game yet. Arc, which is by Momotos, who's a Filipina game designer, illustrator, writer. They designed the whole game by themselves. It's OSR. It's an OSR system, at least inspired by it. And basically what's really cool about this is that the game has a counter that in real time counts down to the apocalypse. So every game that you're playing, even if it's like 4 sessions, is counting down to doom. And your players are trying to either prevent it or play into it, but usually they're trying to prevent it.
Right.
And every 30 minutes or every hour, like it moves that much closer to the end.
I love that idea.
Yeah, it's super cool, and like there's just so much that you can play around with, and it adds such a real tension to the table.
Yeah.
So I'm super excited to play that. Yeah.
I love, so possibly my favorite gaming thing ever written is a tiny little like 3-page module that was written in the 80s for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay called Rough Night at the Three Feathers. And the whole module is 9 different interlacing stories and a timeline.
Right.
And essentially at 8 o'clock, this happens. At 8:30, this happens. And the reason that arc made me think of this is that same sense of my players, they get really weirded out when I go 9 o'clock. Anybody want to do anything?
Yeah.
9:30, because things are still happening.
Yeah.
And they're trying to figure out what. It is. I have run it. I've stolen it and run it in like almost every system I've run. I've used that idea just because it's like, to your point, it's kind of like the Aziba's Bed and Breakfast, where you've got the structure and then the players kind of come in and bring a little chaos to it, and you have to change things up, but the world is still going.
Yeah.
Gesundheit.
Thank you. It's definitely. I think that's one of the things that often TTRPG games, tables can sometimes suffer from, is like just players getting into the zone of like, we'll just plan around indefinitely. And that's okay every now and then, but it can also take the wind out of the game and the tension that you might be going for. And these kind of tools where time suddenly becomes relevant are great. Definitely.
I am 100% stealing that Doomsday idea, because that is fantastic. I mean, just if you like at a con, like I'm running a 4-hour con game, and I'm just like, in 4 hours, the world's going to end,
Yep.
Turn the timer on.
It's perfect for it. And they have a whole mechanic around it that allows you to show that progression and make the players really feel it. It's great. Super awesome.
I have a buddy who I did a show with, Matt Steele, who he actually, when he runs a con game, in his little notes for the adventure, he'll have time notes. Like, if it's been 2 hours, if this hasn't already happened, this happens, and something blows up or something, and it does something like that, where it propels things forward if people are dallying or, that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I like that. I'm going to steal all of these down. So definitely.
Well, look, that is what GMing is at its core, is playing games with other people and going, that was so cool, I'm totally stealing that.
100% agree. Like this is probably one of the main reasons I like being a player, because usually I prefer being a GM, but like player is great because I get to see other GMs do cool stuff, and I'm like, that's genius. I'm totally stealing that.
Yep.
Like, thank you.
It's one thing to like read something and go, I'm going to steal this, but that's a little more kind of academic and hard and harder to when you play in a game, you see it in practice, and you're like, oh, okay, I love the way that this person did that. That's
100%. You get to see it in practice. It's a big difference. Yep.
Yeah. So this is the trick question that I spring on everybody at the end. It's the Space Jam question. So, Shubham, Martians have come to Earth, and they are going to destroy the planet where I keep all my stuff unless you run for them a wildly entertaining 4-hour game. What are you running for them?
Wildly entertaining 4-hour game for a bunch of Martians. Wow, that's a tough one, isn't it? Why would you do this to me?
Well, I mean, you've got the doomsday clock right there, so you can...
Right. It's suddenly the GM's the one under pressure. That's a good question. Jeez, you know what? I'm sure there is a 1-page one that is about just aliens, and I would let them. I would simulate them getting to kill as many humans as they want.
Sate their hunger.
Sate their hunger through RPG. But it's like, I'll create the tropiest humans for them, so that they can feel like they've had their fill of murdering these trophy humans. And at the end of it, hopefully, we can walk away from it still alive. I would do what Reed Richards did, is basically be like, these are the horrors that humans have defeated. And I think he's fighting the skulls, right? And he's like, he shows the footage from Jurassic Park and Godzilla, and he's like, these are the horrors we have defeated. You Martians are nothing. And the Martians are like, oh my God, we should definitely not mess with the humans. I would do that. I'd be like, humans, you want to hear some stories about humans? Let me tell you about Hercules and Godzilla that he defeated. But you can go fight Hercules and you can feel strong, and that's fine.
Let me tell you about New Yorkers.
Yeah, let me tell you about New York, and let me tell you about the rats in New York. That's the one you don't want to mess with. The real monsters. So yeah, there you go.
Well, you have been super generous with your time. This has been fantastic. Folks, check out Daisies and Dragons. The Twitch thing is on there. You can also see it on YouTube. There are it's 4 of you, I think, principally.
3. 3. So on the stream, yes, there's 4 of us. Desi's is run by 3 people.
Yeah.
Indrani, Chirag, and myself. Yeah.
And it is a really fun D&D game. And those of you who know this show know I don't say that lightly. But it's also cool because I'm seeing D&D played internalized in ways that I would never think of, just because our life experiences are so 100% different that you and your players, the players come at things from just a direction that I would never come from. And it's D&D, so I recognize there's a framework that is kind of universal there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. Yeah, no, it's I think this is what most people want when they say they want representation, is they just want to feel like it's not like they're like, hey, your culture no longer should be there. It's like I also exist in this space. Let's share it, and it might lead to some great conversations, right? That's what most people want, is they want conversations and be able to tell their part of the story.
I mean, it's the internet might be the true evil in the world, but the fact that it allows us to talk on almost literally the other side of the world is, that's a lot of points in its favor right there.
I'll give it that. I'll forgive most of Twitter and its discourse if it's allowed for this. So
all right, Zuckerberg, you get this one. Damn it. So check out Daisies and Dragons, folks. And Shubham, thank you so much for spending a little time here. And this, so folks, we didn't get to like half the material that we were going to talk about because this conversation was just so great and full of stuff. So I've ended this thing 4 times, so I'm just going to end it now. This is not my skill saying goodbye. So
I just want to say thank you, because that was a great conversation. I had a really great time, and this was very, very fun and fulfilling, and I really enjoyed that chat. Thank you.
This was great, and this is the start of a conversation. I think that one of the things that I have been trying to put together is connecting some of the GMs that I've talked to talk about various things. And I'm already thinking like, I want to have you and Connie Chang on to talk about running D&D, because you both have unique perspectives. She does Transplanar, fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
You both come from such different perspectives, but you're running the same game. And the next step now is getting GMs together to talk GMing and kind of, let's talk about running initiative, and just like doing some really, so we will get to that. But I am going to finally end this show. Goodbye, internet friends.